Sister Christine, go ahead and start the recording. Thanks.
Oh. Sorry, he's on his way. Forgot you couldn't hear me.
Oh, no, you're doing the prayer?
Yeah.
We thank you, Holy Father, for this blessing you've given us, the Sabbath day. We humbly come before you, Lord, that we may fellowship and partake of your light that you've given us. We humbly ask, Lord, that you open up our understanding and that you bless us with that understanding. Please help us to remember these things that come before us in this light and ingrain it in our hearts and in our minds. For the time is short. And we thank you for blessing us of this day, Lord. And we pray in your holy and mighty name, in the name of Yeshua, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And also, Lord, please bless the presenter tonight and impart your Holy Spirit that your words and your character may be shown. Amen.
Amen.
You guys hear me? Hello?
Hi, Lana. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
And are you presenting, right? It looks
Yes.
awesome.
I hear you.
Okay, thank you. So this presentation is, most of the presentation is actually the review as a background information so that she can explain, so that she can talk about the main goal of the presentation, which is to talk about the temptation in the wilderness. And I will try to just cover rather than read through it. So she shows first that the reform lines of the priests, and she shows the reform lines of priests and the Nethinims to show the relationships between the priests and the Nethinims. And so she says that we understood their history, their dispensation of from 2014 to 2019, their plowing by comparing and contrasting it with our plowing. So here's our line, and this is their line. So and when we did that, we were able to see that there must be a 10-year history of warning. So there must be an increase of knowledge given to a messenger, a leader who is raised up at the end of the time of the end, which is Michael Moore. He has this 10-year history of warning, and he has an increase of knowledge he publishes a foreign movie film, Fahrenheit 11/9, and it is, as she has shown in the previous presentations, it is 100% right. Every part of it was correct, and in a sense that every part of it was supported by the prophecy, that he gets it right without having any prophecy. So there must be two streams of information, a stream that is true and that is false, and it must be a division between two groups. So the two groups in their plowing are liberals and conservatives. And if we remove Trump from equation, you could title that it's the Michael Moore. So it's these two movements are Michael Moore and Steve Bannon. So they're symbols of two. They are the symbols of two different ideologies. So we line up Michael Moore, his movement, and Steve Bannon and his movement, and you can see that they are all coming into the picture at the same time. We trace Steve Bannon, how Steve Bannon began in 2012 and 13, all leading up to 2014. The beginning of the purging of the Republican Party, leading to the end of the purging of the Republican Party. So we went to the movement. We went to the movement of Michael Moore, and we talked about Flint, Michigan, Fahrenheit 9/11, the 10 years Fahrenheit 11/9. Then Michael Moore does his first documentary. When Michael Moore does his first documentary in 1989, we threaded him through our reform line. So he shows up in the picture just the same at the same time when Jeff Pippin, Elder Jeff, shows up in the in our history, as we know that in 1989 that's is the beginning of our reform line. So we spoke about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and how she comes in at the time of the end, and she's born in October 13, 1989, and how she gets elected 2018 at the same time. This becomes the leader. So this, meaning Michael Moore and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they become the leadership of the Netanims. They are leading that group that is diametrically opposed to Steve Bannon and his movement. So it is focused on their plowing, and that the world in this time period undergoing the polarization of the society. So we left when we came down to Sunday law time period, their harvest. When we get to their harvest, we ask the question, first of all, what message do we bring to them? People have various ideas on that. And so some of the ideas is that we bring them biblical only, meaning that message not relating to external events, without involving political explanation. So biblical only message without prophetical or external events. Prophetic message that is a mixture of the two relating to external events, meaning biblical and the external events, or prophetic plus inspiration. It's kind of saying the same thing, but we also bring in Ellen White. So what we are requiring of them, and some of the answers were that no, from the audience was that some said no requirements, and some said that all truth is required and test. So when those that say no as a requirement is necessary to join our movement, they're saying that the message is only external events. So we bring them no message based on the inspiration of Christianity. So it's like we are bringing them purely external events, and external events are catalysts that divide the two groups. If that is the case, if it's purely an external message based on external events, do we give them any other requirement? Some people said no. Some people said we give them all information. We require everything off of them. So we don't just say practice equality. We say you have to be vegan, you have to dress right, you have to eat right, you have to do all of these other requirements. After we identified these two groups, liberals and conservatives, we went to the study of the deadly wound in the papacy. And here then she explains how is it, how we were trying to figure out what is the role of the papacy in the end time. And that's what is the subject of the further presentation. So we had a number of classes where we discussed what the healing of the deadly wound is. Does it relate at all to the papacy, or is it purely Protestantism? And can you guys read this font? Is that convenient, or is it hard to see?
I can read it.
I can read it fine.
Okay,
Just,
thank you.
just fine.
All right. Yeah, if you guys need it bigger, I guess I can always make it bigger. I just know that some people print things, and if they don't have, so you can always let me know. I can make it bigger. So so when we had a number of classes where we discussed that the healing of the deadly wound, what the healing of the deadly wound is, and does it relate at all to the papacy, or is it purely Protestantism? So when we talk about, is it the daughters of Protestant daughters of the Babylon, which is the Protestantism that is purely separate, or is actual papacy itself is involved in it or not? So she says, most of us concluded that the healing of the deadly wound is the rising up of the papacy at the end of the world, separate and distinct from Protestantism. And that's what she's going to be showing the rest of the presentation, that it is truly a separate and distinct from Protestantism, and it feels, is closer to the very end, it's gonna rise. So if it's the papacy, people already started to have a problem with this history. We left that and focused on the study of papacy with the intention of returning to this. Then we did the study of the counterfeit. Then we did the study on the counterfeit. We worked our way through 2.5 centuries of the counterfeit from 1773. And when they go into rebellion to their boss, lining that up with Israel, God's church, comparing and contrasting two churches. So they went into apostasy. The Catholic Church went into apostasy. Then they were taken into captivity. And then we traced their coming out of captivity. And the modern Israel comes out in two parts. First, Millerites, and the second is 144,000. Again, this is a repeat of the her previous presentation, where she shows that the differences between Alpha of modern Israel, and not really difference, the similarities of Alpha of modern Israel and Alpha of modern Babylon. So that you can notice that they are 100 years apart. Starts in 1798. This one's the modern Babylon starts. Alpha of modern Babylon starts in 1899, and it's both are 46 years. Take span of 46 years, and both end in great in disappointment for themselves. So modern Babylon therefore must come out in two parts. So the modern Israel comes out in two parts, yeah, Millerites and 144,000, and modern Babylon also comes out in two parts. And we trace 1798, 1899, both of them being Alpha history. So yeah, here she just reiterates the previous presentations information, that the rising up of the leadership of the restructuring at the inside, the giving of a prophet, Ellen White, Lucia, which is Ellen White in the Alpha of the modern Israel, and Lucia in the Alpha of modern Babylon, the three children, if you remember. We traced the reorganization of the Catholic Church, the organization of the Adventist Church in 1863, 1962, the Second Vatican Council, and the papacy at the end of the world. So the papacy at the end of the world, a good organization in 1773, they silenced the Jesuits, and that meaning that they were staying faithful to their boss, and they silenced the Jesuits. And at the Second Vatican Council, who is bringing the message? At the Second Vatican Council, who is bringing the message? It's the Jesuits. And at the end of the world, who are their prophets? The Jesuits. So you can trace them through from the very beginning of our study in 1773. Then you can of our study of 1773. Then you can see that their theology, the message they begin to develop around the time of the Second Vatican Council. And what does the Second Vatican Council line up with? It lines up with 1863. You see, there's still 100-year delay between the counterfeit and the true. Then they fight with Jesuits and restrained by John Paul II. Then you have a clash between this radical message, the Jesuits and the leadership in 1989. 1989 internally is 1888, meaning that 1989 for the Alpha of modern Babylon is 1888, which is internally, which is Johnson Wagner versus Butler. Radical new message coming into conflict with leadership, traditionalist Butler, and new message Johnson Wagner. So we trace the Jesuits, John Paul II lining up with Johnson Wagner versus Butler, and we traced that 1989 of counterfeit is 1888 equals is the same as 1888 of our line, lines up with the 1888. Then we come to our time of the end of the Omega history of modern Israel, and in 1989 we have two leaders. In the history of success, you have John the Baptist and Christ born at the same time in the same year, similar point in time. At the time of the end, they're born at the time of the end. They're both there. You don't get all those gospel stories about the three wise men going to the birth of John at the time of the end. It's about the second leader. It's just as much as the first. I mean, it's about the second leader just as much as the first. They are both there, but John does the work first. So in the Omega of modern Babylon, there are two leaders at the time of the end. Pope Benedict Ratzinger and Cardinal Bergoglio. And then both, they later on, they become Benedict and Francis, and neither of them are popes in 2001. So instead, you're going to see the death of the leadership in 2005 and the election of Pope Benedict, which is the first angel of the Omega of the modern Babylon. So in 2001 is their time of the end. 2005 is the death of the leadership, lining up with 9/11, and then we're back on course. So what's the difference between the ancient glorious land and modern glorious land? The ancient glorious land is Israel, and modern glorious land is United States. And what type of government did the ancient glorious land have? Ancient glorious land had Israel, combined church and state. Modern glorious land, United States, separated the church and state. And what happened in the history of Christ? The history of Christ culminates with separation of church and state. If you go back to Samuel, he leads Israel religiously and politically embodied in one man. We see that with Samuel, then we saw that with the counterfeit. We saw that with Samuel, and we saw that with counterfeit Darius. In Daniel chapter 6, Darius wears two hats. He is a king and he is a god. And what he does as God, he cannot undo as king. Yeah, you remember the story. So in the story of Daniel 6, Darius as king wants to undo what he did as God, and he is not able to do. And the church rules the state even when embodied in one person. So you go through Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and there is this combination of church and state. Christ separated the church and state, and Satan separated them in 538. So how many years did it take him to counterfeit? Exactly 500 years. So in Alpha of modern Babylon, it took Satan 500 years to counterfeit Christ. In Omega of modern Babylon, it takes him 100 years. Then we come into Omega of modern Babylon, and we start off differently. 1989 to 2001. So what's time of the end in 1989 for us? 2001 is the time of the end for counterfeit, for Babylon, modern Babylon. But who is catching up? 2001 and 2005, and then this movement trips. We reject time setting, and who gets the jump? 2013, 2014. And in that history of 2013 and 14, we're now on a collision course. We're running at the same time. And we compared and contrasted the histories of the true and the counterfeit in different ways. Then we spoke about Benedict and Francis. Francis's name means his name is after Francis of Assisi, and um, it means to restructure the church. He's known for caring for less privileged people. Often talk about his relation to animals and with all those suffering or the poor. So what would you call that? It's a liberation theology. So Pope Francis chose his name wisely. In 2014, the second angel is empowered. Pope Francis becomes Pope. 2014, he begins that restructuring of the Catholic Church. 2014, he begins stacking the College of Cardinals. And John Paul II was a Pope for 27 years. And during his time, he appointed 19 cardinals. In 6 years, Pope Francis has appointed 67 cardinals. So 17, so 27 years took so within 27 years Pope John Paul II appointed 19 cardinals, and the 67 in just in 6 years it took Francis to appoint 67 cardinals. Francis is rebuilding the Catholic Church after his own mold. We spoke about how he restructured the church on 3 different levels. In 2014 and 19, he appoints the first liberal cardinals for the College of Cardinals. And then second level on the Synod of the Family, he introduces the liberation theology. And then the third one is the Amazonian Synod, trying to introduce married priests. Yeah, and he's met with opposition, and there is a similarity between what's going on in the United States, that the traditionalists are opposing Mitch McConnell blocking Obama, lines up with Pope Benedict opposing Pope Francis. So then we bookended this dispensation of what the second angel is doing and who starts to oppose him. It's the first angel. There is a split within the Catholic Church between those who support the first angel and those who support the second. And there are people who now have, for the first time in 600 years, another living pope they can turn to if they don't like the one who is in actual practicing pope. They don't like Francis, they can say he's an apostate, he's an intruder, and Benedict is still the pope. So people have a choice between the leader and the former leader who is still living. That splits internally the Catholic Church. The entire time there were these 2 groups, but before Benedict starts to give them a voice, Archbishop Wegener begins attack on Francis by speaking out. So internally, the Midnight Cry message is presented. Elder Jeff is silent, but his disciples are already speaking out in 2018. The true and the counterfeit, the counterfeit of both disciples of the first angel begin to attack the message. Then the first angel begins to speak. When? What months? In April 2019, Benedict attacks the second leader, and in April 2019, Elder Jeff attacks the second leader. A couple of days apart, you come down to the final months of 2019, and Elder Jeff speaks in open opposition in final months of 2019. The same time is the Amazonian Synod on Married Priests, where Pope Francis is giving his message, and Pope Benedict begins to speak in open opposition. In September and October, he writes his portion of that book that attacks Pope Francis's position on married priests. And in September and October, Elder Jeff records presentations that attack the message of the Midnight Cry. So we compared and contrasted that history, and it is watertight. If people don't accept this movement and the new leadership, what Elder Jeff has to say is that Francis and Benedict are as bad as each other. We're saying if Pope Francis and Pope Benedict are as bad as each other, then he has to say that Jeff and Parminder are as good as each other. but he doesn't use that compare and contrast. He doesn't believe in the watertight nature of the study of the counterfeit anymore. So he used to, but he can't because it becomes an untenable position. So we traced the line of the counterfeit, then we looked into the future, and based on that watertight nature, we made some conclusions. Right now we have been through the Gethsemane, through the cross, and this movement is smitten and torn. What do we know is coming prophetically? What is the thing that's coming up, which is, it is the Pentecost, a binding up of this movement as a history of success. And from Pentecost to 34 AD, they did the last work for the church, and then they were fully ready, empowered movement to take on the world. So we know that we rise from Panium to Sunday law, and whatever trouble looks like, it exists now. What about the counterfeit? They rise from Panium to Sunday law, which is exactly what we have been saying, Sunday law in a simplistic fashion, the healing of the deadly wound. Then we went to the third Diadochi War. The third Diadochi War told us the whole story, but it added details. It gave evidence to the rise of the papacy, and it added details about the relationship between the papacy and the king of the north and the king of the south. They begin as friends at the time of the end, the king of the north and king of the south, and then their friendship is destroyed. Then follow the years of tension and fighting, and then Seleucus takes Babylon and sets up for a war beginning at Panium. So Panium to Sunday law is fought between Seleucus and Antigonus, or papacy and Donald Trump, the United States. At the Sunday law, beginning of the Seleucid dynasty, Seleucus goes east and he establishes his empire. So at the Sunday law, the papacy has won. It has established itself. Its deadly wound is healed, and it's going to go forward and do a work. All of that was to show the rise of the papacy within the history from Panium to Sunday law, and then doing a work for the world after the Sunday law. So yeah, papacy is rising from Panium to Sunday law on the line of the Netinims. So the purpose of doing all of this was to bring down to the harvest of the world this history of Sunday law and close of probation. What we want to understand is what two groups are going to develop there. And we said conservatives and liberals. So we came back to this study that we left, and we said, okay, so it's Francis here. So now we start to have a problem saying that the two groups are conservatives and liberals. So we went back to another compare and contrast, and we saw that in the history of our plowing, which is priests plowing, it's Elder Jeff was his movement, was his ministry versus the Adventist structure, because this is the history of Daniel chapter 2, and the story of story of the stone being cut out of the mountain. So the theme of this whole reform line is that the separation of a movement from the Adventist church structure. At the time of the end, in this increase of knowledge, you see that begin to happen. The Adventist church structure, the mountain, which is the mountain, and Elder Jeff and Future of America begin to the cutting out of the stone. So yeah. So we could, in a simplistic fashion, see this whole reform line as being just its movement cut out of Adventism. But we got to the history when we are given the midnight cry and told to come out. Nearly all of us have come out in this history, which is 2014 to 2019. Because that's when we're told to come out of Adventism. But what split shaking happened in this history was not a split and a shaking between us and Adventism, but between new leadership of this movement and Elder Jeff and FFA. So when we have 5 key waymarks, the middle waymark is the Sunday law, and on every reform line we have on every reform line we have at that waymark there is a change of leadership that occurred. So here you can see, I guess the fonts are very small, and I'm sorry for that. So this is J for Jeff and P for Parminder. So here in 2014, there's a split, change in leadership, and the same way at each other dispensations, in each other dispensations, Sunday law, which is the in our case it was 2014. It's the change of leadership. So it goes from John to Jesus. It goes from Miller to Snow, Moses to Joshua, and every one of our reform lines is consistent on that point. So that 2014, there is a change in leadership, and the thread this movement faces that splits the movement of the priest is not this movement versus Adventism, because we were already cut out of them. It is the new leadership versus those who did the plowing. So when we compared and contrasted what we had, that we had to allow for some differences with the lines of Nethinims, the difference being that they are called to come out in their harvest, and we're called to come out in our latter rain. That means that the Nethinims middle way mark must have a transition in leadership. Michael Moore and AOC that led the Nethinims from 14 to 19. So, yeah, this is an illustration of the Waymark 2021. That there is there's a change in leadership, but she's going to explain further down that this change in leadership is not obvious, not all the way until this this period between Daniel 11:41 and Daniel 12:1. So this is the story of something being beaten out, wheat being beaten out of the statue of Daniel in Daniel 2, and the stone being cut out of the mountain. The stone that's being cut out of the mountain is priests being cut out of the Adventist structure. The wheat being beaten out of the statue is it's a like parallel of the stone is the priest, and the wheat is the Nethinims. So the wheat coming out of the statue is the story of the Trump's America. Wheat coming out of the Trump's conservative America. And at the very beginning, you have this movement. I really like this that she put it this way, that in this statue, so the statue is the world, and it says come out of Trump's conservative America. So that's the I really liked her the way she put it there. So at the very beginning, you have this movement, and Elder Jeff versus the mountain. The very beginning, at the very beginning, you have Michael Moore versus the statue, which is Donald Trump's America. So Michael Moore is Nethinim's Jeff, and what is Adventism for us, so is Donald Trump for the Nethinims. I mean, for Michael Moore. When you get to their Sunday law, which is Nethinim's Sunday law history, and there's a transfer in leadership, who becomes their new leadership? This movement. If we're telling them to come out and join us, we're telling them to where to go and what to do. Yeah, which is really beautiful, because I never thought of in my Adventist mindset back then. I was thinking about it, and I was just wondering, we say come out, and then you run to the mountains. Where do you run? You run to the mountains, and we don't know where, and we just know that it's to the mountains. Which mountains? I mean, and then I would wonder, because I live in Indiana, and Indiana is plains and there's no mountains, and I just understood it. It's very literally, so like you had to run to the mountains. So anyway, we're telling the movement, telling them that this movement is telling them, the Nethinims, where to go and what to do. So they come out, and that's not all of it, but how to live, and how to dress, and how to eat. So we're leading them here, which is between the Sunday law and loud cry of Nethinims. but we don't begin that at Sunday law, which is Netanyim Sunday law. In 2014, no one in this movement, which is our Sunday law, no one in this movement knows that Elder Parminder is the new leader of the movement. You don't have to. It's marked in prophecy. It takes people a while to figure that out. No one knew in 1989 that Elder Jeff was a leader of the movement either, which is the transfer of the leadership from the Adventist structure to this movement. And he didn't even know that, and that doesn't matter because it's marked in prophecy. Just like in 1798, William Miller, he didn't know that he's raised to be the first angel's messenger. And in 1798, when this transition happened, he had no idea who he was, and he was a deist. So 2014, at the Sunday Law Waymark, we have transfer of leadership. The same way in 2021, Sunday Law for the World, there's going to be a transfer of leadership from on the line of Netanyms. They have a transfer of leadership from Michael Moore and AOC to us. So when we get to the history, when Netanyms are called to come out, it's the new leadership, which is the movement, versus Michael Moore and AOC. Their message is formalized in September, October 2018. At the same time, the Midnight Cry given, which begins in September and ends in October. In October 2018, Michael Moore meets Pope Francis at the Vatican, and they are together. They are in unity. So Michael Moore is on whose side? He's on Francis's side. So when Francis begins to rise in this, so is then, does it, okay, if you guys are listening there, is the third angel's messenger for the counterfeit is then Francis, right? Because Michael Moore is the first messenger, AOC is the second, and Francis is the, I guess I'm not quite sure.
I don't think that AOC is the second, because in our movement, it's just the first angel that was wrong. And I'm pretty sure Tess was saying that Michael Moore and AOC are representing the first angel. But the second and third would be the true one that takes the message away from them. And that's what she's saying, is that we're their second and third angel. Because we take over leadership from both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So they both end up being left behind, just like Jeff was, because they went off the tracks. And then Donna and Renee are asking, what is AOC? AOC is the acronym for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a congresswoman that came in 2018, and she's been really big with the liberal crowd. They look up to her a lot and follow her lead, along with Michael Moore. So that's the thing, is that we're from what Tess is saying, we're taking over leadership away, just like Tess and Parminder took leadership from Jeff. Yeah,
okay, I got it. So that makes sense. So I was just wondering, what's then the role of Francis there? Like,
he's going to be a false. It's just the papacy.
False prophet.
I'm not sure. You're welcome. It's just whatever role they play, it's the role of the papacy that we always had from Ellen White's writings and the Bible. They have their role to play. And I think that's going to get more developed as we go along, but it started with the Third Diadochi War when she opened it up in Germany, and we saw that Seleucus comes back at Sunday Law. And so it's opening up more and more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Adriana. That's very enlightening.
But that's a big, so you realize, based off of this, though, we are already now leaders of the Levites. We took leadership end of 2019, November 9.
Okay.
They don't know it yet. They won't know it until their harvest time at Panium, when we go give them the message. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think it's Sunday Law for them, because she puts it here, the separation movement.
That's for the Nethinims.
Yeah.
Sunday Law for the Levites was in 2019.
Yeah, that I agree with, but
And that's when we took over leadership of the Levites. They don't know it yet until Panium when we go give them.
oh yeah, with that I agree, but I'm not, because I heard Netanims. I may have misheard you and misunderstood you. Yeah, so for the Netanims, it's this 2021, but for the Levites, which is very interesting that yeah.
It's crazy to, when she said that, I'm like, wow, we really have a lot of responsibility. That's all I was saying,
Yeah,
that we don't
yeah,
realize.
I
So
know.
That's why we're being taught that we don't want to just learn some. We want to learn. We need to know everything. We need to learn
Yes, to
everything.
exactly.
yes, to to, how would I say, not to say to argue, but to counter, logic with logic, and to because there are many very well versed, they went to Andrews University or other theological schools, and uh,
Exactly.
so we have to be on par with them, meaning that to be not to be found, like wondering what is this about, and they're talking about something that we haven't heard before. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So when Francis begins to rise in this history, which is from Sunday law to close of probation for Netanims, is Michael Moore going to take our side or his side? So who becomes our greatest threat? It was Elder Jeff in our history, and will be Michael Moore um, in the Netanims history. Because the split happened within the priesthood, Adventism is long gone. The split happens within the Netanims, and the conservatives and Trump, they already swept away. They are already gone. I mean, by Sunday law, in that time period between Sunday law and close of probation. So the split happens within the movement, and when the split happens within the movement of the Netanims, is between the new leadership, you and I, this movement, and the modern Babylon. So the papacy, instead of being a secondary threat to Protestantism, which is Donald Trump's conservative America, it becomes much more serious when we consider the Netanims in the history of their harvest. Yeah, so papacy, instead of being a secondary threat to Protestantism, which is, being a threat to the Donald Trump's conservative America, it becomes much more serious when we consider the Netanims in the history of their harvest. Yeah, and it will be much easier to choose an easier path where you don't have any requirements and no reforms and nothing, compared to versus our movement, where we have requirements to join the movement. So it begins to be quite a loaded point when you think of what people's ideas of this history are. In the last months, especially since last year, we have just entered a new dispensation, and people are looking at this line, at the line of the world, at the line of the Netanims, and making their conclusions about their own spiritual experience. And what I'm concerned is their errors in understanding their own spiritual experience. You first need to go and show them their understanding, what they're understanding wrong about the world and the reform line of the Netanims. And this is the history of their plowing, the history of their first angel. What's the problem with the first angel? He's half right and half wrong. So Moses, John the Baptist, William Miller, Elder Jeff, does any one of them understand the nature of the kingdom? No. Our problem is that the external movement, which is Netanims, being plowed by external events, and their message, the message Michael Moore and AOC are giving, it must be half right and half wrong. And people have not understood that, or they have not behaved as if they understood that. Going back to the line of Christ, you see that the transfer of John to Christ, does John understand the nature of kingdom? No. Who does Christ represent? He represents this movement. He represents the new leadership of this movement. So the faithful of this movement, the new leadership, do they have it half right? Do they have a half right and half wrong message? Do they misunderstand the nature of the kingdom? No. But people have swapped those two. They've said, we must be half right and half wrong because we're conservatives and we think like conservatives. We have all of these issues. So we have to go to the world and understand from AOC and Michael Moore and all of the secular people about what to do and how to think. Because people are saying, not directly, but they're implying, We've got all of these errors, and we have it all, and they Netherlands have it all figured out. I would I would be quite forthright in the other way. We have it all figured out, theoretically. I know we have an increase of knowledge further down, but yeah, she stresses out we have it all figured out. We don't have a misunderstanding about the nature of Christ's kingdom. They are half right and half wrong. So we've left the presentation by asking people to think where they half right and half wrong, because if you can't tell me where they're half wrong, you can't look to them as some type of compass about what we should think, or what we should wear, or what we should do. People are looking to this model on the line of the Netanyms before Sunday law to say they have it all figured out. There is grand political movement. We can't go to them because we have all the problems, and we're going to come into this harvest period, and finally we'll have figured out all of our errors, and we all can come into some type of grand political unity. I guess I had, I kind of wondered about that. That's the type of narrative they're sharing. The problem with that is, first of all, we are the leaders, they are not. The second problem is that they're half wrong, so we must have something to teach them because we are not half wrong. So what we think the period of Sunday law, the close of probation of Netanyms looks like, impacts the decisions that people are making right now. It impacts how people are reading the vows, because if they have it all figured out, do they need vows about reforms? No. So we must be the ones that are wrong. We need to change, come in line with them. Where they have wrong? We think so. I guess she asked this question, kind of expecting people to figure it out, or give answers. So we think they have figured out the issue of equality, and we're behind. And they're saying that by pointing to people like Beyonce and saying, "Look, Beyonce sings about equality. She has it all figured out." And what did we say? Line up Beyonce with her husband, who takes care who takes care of their appearance, who has to. If you switch what they look like, would Beyonce have any of her influence and power? No. Is that equality? No. Do they understand equality in the world? Not very well. They are able to go so far, but the minute they are looking at AOC, and she has a certain image, and with that image has given her a certain following and power, if she looked like Michael Moore, would she have that? No. Does he have to look like her to have a voice? No, because he's a man. So the Netanyms, I guess she's here. She's I really like that. What she's basically saying is that the Netanyms that we're looking at, they really don't have the full knowledge. They don't have the clear understanding of what what the true liberalism is. So they're still looking at their image, at their looks. So that's why they pay a lot of attention to their makeup, to their dress, clothes, and you know how their of their appearance. And that is not, in one of the presentations, she actually, I think it's further down, she actually stresses that we in our movement are focusing on more on spiritual. And then she says that, yeah, sure, it's nice to look, to be presentable, but it has, it's different from how the world understands the image, the perceived image. So they are able to go so far, but the minute they are looking at AOC, and she has a certain image, and with that image has given her a certain following and power. And if she looked like Michael Moore, would she have that? No. Does he have to look like her to have a voice? No, because he's a man. So the Netanyms, the world, those are on the right side of the issue. How good is their understanding of equality in reality? It's really poor. It is only this movement that can deal with that issue in a fashion that is comprehensive. So when it comes to the nature of kingdom, or what's their mistake? Because it always comes down to the nature of the kingdom. They are dreaming about a utopian society. Their idea of nature of the kingdom is a utopian society. And Michael Moore wants a social society, a multipolar. And I just wanted to stress that I don't think she doesn't mean social society as something negative. She's just saying that they want is a society which the you know that's perceivably it's good for everybody, but it's just like in Soviet Union, it was a social. It was truly. It wasn't actually truly a communist. It was always a socialist society. But one thing, I mean, the ideals were very high, but the reality was very bad because it dealt with how you behaved in the society, in the community, but it doesn't deal with the inner spiritual, with the spiritual condition of a human being. And that's why everything was forced. People were driven by fear or by rejection of the society. So Michael Moore wants a social society, a multipolar system that is entirely secular, and there are no spiritual requirements for entering this utopian society. It is here on this earth. His Michael Moore's utopian society is his kingdom is here on this earth, expected kingdom. It is literally earthly kingdom that has no requirements, no religious elements, no reforms, and that is why some of us think that when we give them a message, we give them no requirements to enter into this movement. All because we believed Michael Moore's definition of the kingdom. Some people are going so far as to thinking that heaven is on this earth, that somehow we're going to have this secular society on earth, and that heaven is just a spiritual application. So people are doing different degrees of this, but they're all doing the same thing. None of these views existed before we started speaking about Michael Moore and what he's doing. Because we've discussed him in the plowing time, people have looked into him. They have seen the nature of the kingdom Michael Moore is trying to set up, and they've brought that into this movement. Does that make sense? I want us to see where we've got that from. We've got that from the world, from the Netanims. So we come into their history. So when we come into their history, we're telling them about the kingdom of heaven, not on this earth. And it becomes so when it becomes a kingdom of heaven, all of a sudden, what problem do you have? So to get there to the kingdom of heaven, there's a list of requirements that you might not hear in this kingdom, earthly kingdom. But when we understand the nature of the kingdom, that it's a spiritual kingdom, that it's a kingdom in heaven, then there starts to be a list of requirements to get there. So somebody could accept equality. I could accept men and women are equal, and then I could go and kill my sister. I've just committed a murder. Do I go to heaven? No, because there's a standard, a list of requirements. In the Millerite history, if we were to talk about Millerite history, okay, this one needed to be edited out. Priests equals Levites and equals Netanims. So what does that mean? If you guys remember what it meant? It basically, the study was about how much do we teach Levites and Netanims, and
We have to, that's the one where he teaches us that we all need to learn how to teach.
yes, but
Everything.
yes.
Mhm.
Yes, exactly. So we're gonna have to. So since priests equal Levites and equal Netanims, then it means that the Netanims have to be taught the same thing that we have. So if we want to talk about Alpha history, so she's gonna go back to the Millerites history, and she's gonna show that in 18 for the first group. So this is their line, yeah, Millerites line, from time of the end to their to their second advent, projected that failed. So and they had the first group, yeah, the first group that that would have been their priests. So from 1798 to 1844, they have developed this chart, which is 1843 chart. And so this 1843 chart is the when they reach this 1850s, which is Sunday law. Yeah. um, what they're going to do is that they're gonna teach everything that they believe. They're gonna put everything that they believed in into this chart, and this chart is gonna go to the world. It's gonna go to the churches, and then it's gonna go to the world. And that's the rest of the the rest of the uh, few pages of the presentation is going to be dedicated to. So she says that I have plotted at fractal level of this fractal level of the first group. So for this first group, what's given to them? What was the message of the first group? So the whole message was summarized into 1843 chart. And when you come down to 1850, they are to go back to the world and they issue 1850, which has a correction for 1844. And they go back to the world, and the issue is in 1850 slavery. So is the slavery is in the chart, which is it's their testing message, just like in our time is equality. In their time, it's the slavery. And no, it's not on their chart. If they are right on this issue, so does Ellen White get to this history and say we're just going to give them, the world, give them a message on slavery? If they're right on this issue of slavery, we have nothing else to give them. It's purely secular. What does she say? She says we need to take this 1843 chart and correct it, and then they produce 1850 chart, and then the people say the testing message is slavery. Um, do they say the testing message is slavery? What people are saying is we can understand all of this. We are priests. But when we go to the world, if the external message, testing message is equality, we don't need any of our accumulated baggage. So who has the problem with that? What's the problem with that? The 1850s chart has everything. What the priests have to understand, the chart for the first group became the chart for this that went to the world. It is separate to the testing issue, and the testing issue was slavery, but they did not have a message based solely on slavery. They wrote about it, they published it, but so can we discard anything that we've accumulated over the last 31 years? When we go to the world, how much are they required to see and accept? Everything. If you have 6,000 years of progression, God is giving light after light after light. And when we get down into our dispensation, we need to have the accumulated light of 6,000 years. And when we go to the world, does that 6,000 years get put aside? No, they have to accept the accumulated life of 6,000 years as well. Otherwise, it's not an increase of knowledge. Then you're going backwards, not forwards. So in the Millerite history, all the things that they have accumulated were put on the chart and sent to the world. At the same time, the external issue is slavery, and those who are wrong about slavery left the movement and lost their salvation. And Ellen White tells us that. So people lost their salvation based on how they stood on the issue of slavery. It tested them, and United States, the glorious land. But the part of the movement, they had to. But to be part of the movement, they had to accept everything on the 1850s chart. And here's on the background is Elder Parminder's comment. He says that testing message of their time was not codified on their chart, and that is what caught them by surprise. So the issue of slavery is not on the charts. It's not codified. It's separate, and we have the same dynamic. What is codified is the Sabbath and our rules and regulations. Equality is not codified, so it becomes in some ways a difficult test. But we can see that slavery was not codified on the charts. At the same time, it's separated. So I want us to consider why we're going through what we're going through. How do you know how to behave, and how do you know what to do? And the audience says, by studying the past history on the lines. And then she says, so how do we know how to behave based upon where we are on the reform line? You know what you're supposed to do. Do everything that you do is dictated by where you are on the reform line, whether or not you're sharing the gospel with your Muslim neighbor. So it's all dependent upon knowing where you are on the reform line. Then she goes back to our reform line, and then she tackles the issue that I think that most of the that she actually intended this presentation to be about, which is the temptation of the wilderness. I wanted us to consider the issue of priests, and then she said, and then she shows this, draws this cartoon where it's the history of in 27 AD. Jesus is baptized. He's 30 years old, so he's birth at time of the end. 12 years old, he comes to the temple, and then he is baptized 18 years later, and this covers the span of 30 years. So in 27 AD, Jesus is baptized. He's 30 years old, and he must be ready to go to work, but he goes into the wilderness. I want us to consider where we are on our reform line in our history. Where are we? We are in the wilderness between his baptism and when he goes into active ministry, but we could call it the first temple cleansing. We know that we're in the history of Christ in the wilderness, so that should start to tell us what we're experiencing and how to behave. I want us to look at Christ's experience here in CSA 32.6. She's gonna quote just a relevant quote, just a relevant part of the quote. In the wilderness of temptation, the destiny of the human race had been at stake. Do you think we're in a dangerous time period? Yes. If the priests fail, what hope is there for Levites or Nethinims? So you know right now, in this dispensation, in the dispensation of our harvest, there must be issues which put the whole plan of salvation, the whole line of 144,000 at stake, the whole gospel at stake. Do you guys have you guys thought about, have this happened before? That that there's a group of people that were in the same place that we are now, and in that group of people is not Christ. I was thinking about it, and I think it really happened with Millerites, because if Ellen White says that Christ, Jesus really meant to come back in that history, and if they would have, if they wouldn't fail, then we wouldn't have World War I, World War II, and other wars that is going on, like in the Middle East right now. So yeah, the whole, the salvation, the whole line of 144,000 at stake, the whole gospel at stake. Christ was then conqueror. Now the tempter had come for the last fearful struggle. For this, he had been preparing during the 3 years of Christ's ministry. Everything was at stake with him. If he failed here, his hope of mastery was lost. The kingdoms of the world would finally become Christ's. He himself would be overthrown and cast out. So she's talking about Christ in the wilderness, and she compares and contrasts that through this paragraph with Christ in Gethsemane and the cross. So she's saying that in Gethsemane and the cross, Satan made his last and final assault on Christ. Wilderness is the last final assault prior to his death on the cross. So it's the first assault. We all know that this movement has been through Gethsemane. It's been through the crucifixion into the tomb. And the final months of our dispensation were fraught with danger. But then she says the first assault of Satan, which she also uses the same quote, his form was marred more than the forms of men. She uses that same sentiment to apply to the wilderness time period. So the Gethsemane is an assault that puts the plan of salvation in jeopardy, and the wilderness puts the plan of salvation in jeopardy. So, do any of us feel like we've gone through November 9 and we're in a nice, calm period now? No, Gethsemane was danger, wilderness was danger. Christ was weak and emaciated in the Gethsemane, and he was weak and emaciated in the wilderness. So if you take both of them, bring them into our experience as a movement, and you see the danger we're faced towards the end of the last dispensation, and the danger that we're still in, that comes as a warning that we we know that we're in a time period where we must watch and pray and consider our position carefully. I'll give an evidence for how Ellen White talks of this history in CTR 192.4. When Jesus was led into the wilderness to be tempted, he was led by the Spirit of God. He did not invite temptation. He went into the wilderness to be alone, to contemplate his mission and work. By fasting and prayer, he was to brace himself for the blood-stained path he must travel. She talks of this as being the final steps of preparation. So even so he's 30 years old and baptized, there was one final step in this preparation, and that was the wilderness. For the movement of the priest, it's the same thing. It's our final step of preparation. But Satan knew that the Savior had gone into the wilderness, and he thought this was the best time to approach him, weak and emaciated from hunger, worn and haggard with mental agony. Christ's visage was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. So she's quoting that passage about Jesus' visage being marred that we applied to Gethsemane and the cross, and she applies that to the wilderness. So can we see that we can place that in two different places, when Christ is in the wilderness and when Christ is in Gethsemane. I want to make a point about this, about how this is recorded in the Gospels, because you find it in Matthew and you find it in Luke. And what's the difference between how it's recorded in Matthew and Luke? They put temptations in different order. So if we want to understand the correct order that he went through uh, um, in actual history, we have to go to the Desire of Ages. And his first temptation is Desire of Ages 117.3, is the bread in which Satan is disguised. In Desire of Ages 124.3 is the cast down, when he says cast down from temple, and Satan is again disguised. But in the third Desire of Ages 121.9, his temptation with kingdoms, and Satan in his true form of a mighty angel. So Jesus was victor in the second temptation, and now Satan manifests himself in his true character, but he does not appear as a hideous monster with cloven feet and bat's wings. He is a mighty angel, though fallen. He avows himself the leader of rebellion and God of this world. Placing Jesus upon a high mountain, Satan caused the kingdoms of the world in all their glory to pass in a panoramic view before him. The sunlight laid the temple cities, marble places, fertile fields, and fruit-laden vineyards. The traces of evil were hidden. The eyes of Jesus, so lately greeted by gloom and desolation, now gazed upon a scene of unsurpassed loveliness and prosperity. Then the tempter's voice was heard, "All this power I will give thee, and the glory of them. For that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will, I give it. If thou therefore will worship me, all shall be thine." So it's here the only reason that Satan can offer him the kingdoms is he's saying that these kingdoms already belong to him. So to do that, he had to give up his pretense of being some messenger from God. So he had to show his true form as Satan. The Desire of Ages gives us the correct order of this temptation. He couldn't offer him the kingdoms until he'd thrown off his pretense, his acting. He only did that in the third temptation. So if you go to Luke, it won't give you the correct order for this. The order in Luke will be bread, the kingdoms, and then cast down from the temple. So if you go to Matthew, in Matthew 4, it will say that take stone and make it bread. And what is Christ's condition? He's starving, he's hungry, and he's hungry for bread. And the bread symbolizes what in the Bible? It symbolizes bread of life, or the message. So if you were to go to if you were to go to 5T 5 testimonies volume 5 206.3, and she's gonna say the third angel of Revelation 14 is represented as flying swiftly through the midst of heaven, crying, "Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the face of Jesus." Here is shown the nature of the work of the people of God. They have a message so important that they are represented as flying in the presentation of it to the world, and then they are holding in their hands the bread of life for a famishing world. So the bread in this in this part, she's saying that the bread of life is the message for the starving world. But the message is bread. So how is Christ? He's starving, he's hungry, he has no bread. And when was the last time he had bread? At the baptism. So is Christ? So who is Christ, and who does he represent? He represents the movement of the priests. So I want to make application all through the last 18 months. We've make an application that all through the last 18 months we've had a message, the growing midnight cry message that all of us have had trouble keeping up with. Then we come to the camp meeting in Germany, began with World War II, closed with World War One. That whole midnight cry message bookends and closes. Then Parminder and I, through no planning, there is no school at that time, and we're relatively silent. Everything goes quiet. November 9th comes around, and people are saying, "Explain to us November 9, explain to us Raffia." Now I could have gone straight to this conclusion and said, no, this is the papacy, and the division is between the two groups. But we took 3 weeks of classes to get to that point. So I'm not going to talk about November 9th because we would need at least 3 weeks of more classes. Then she's going to say that giving conclusions is not helpful, and Parminder and I are silent, and in this comparative silence, people are hungry for a message. They have had 18 months of the midnight cry, and they are hungry. And what's the temptation? Take a stone and force it to become a message. And what did Christ say? I can't use my power to make your stone a message. So in the history, when it's quiet, people start to develop this idea that they have some type of stone, and it's a message that is needed for this movement. So do we have a message right now? No, we don't. The history of the wilderness tells you that clearly. And the explanations of our questions will come, but for whatever reason, whether it's Christ in the tomb or Christ in the wilderness, we're in a period where we are to hang on to the light God has given us. We trust in his leading, and he understands, and we understand, and understand that right now he has not given us a message. But there are people who think that they have a stone, and that stone is a message to this movement. But what is a stone that they're sharing? It's the idea that of our of reforming our vows. So people believe that they have a message of liberalism to come and teach this movement. That's what is being developed. Elder Parminder says in the background that stone is a symbol of the Gentiles. So the stone is Gentiles and bread is message. So we're being offered a message that comes through Gentiles. And what Gentiles specifically? Michael Moore and his half-wrong message. So something that belongs to the Gentiles, a stone, is being given to the starving movement and saying, force this and make it bread. How to know what's wrong? Because the people are saying that either they say it explicitly or less explicitly. What's the pregnant thought they give with that? If you are different to FFA, if you're so different, if you are the movement, if Elder Parminder and Elder Tessa are the leadership, they're going to make this stone, this liberal message, and make it bread. That should be the first sign that something has gone seriously wrong. We have this message of liberalism when I say that it comes down to these vows that Elder Parminder was speaking about. What God requires of us, what type of movement we're all to be. all of that is being encapsulated into message, and you see that being promoted and developed. And this is taking a stone, something they got from the Gentiles in a time of period when we have no message, and saying, if you're different from FFA and if you really believe in freedom, you'll endorse this, and we don't. So the second test, if you go back to Matthew 4:4, it says, but he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Christ responds, it is written. So what does Christ go back to? And thus says the Lord. Can you see where we're under attack already? Again, people take what we've taught, whether it's about liberalism or dress reform, and they manipulated it and twisted it, not necessarily maliciously, and twisted it. And do we believe in thus says the Lord? Yes, we do, when we take methodology to it. And then he says, thus says the Lord, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. On our reform line, we have a message right now. Now when I change thus says the Lord to something that I feel like is an exact equivalent, which is thus says the line, do we have a message? No. So go to the next temptation, which is Matthew 4:5. Then the devil takes him up into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and says unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. So Satan has learned a lesson from the first temptation. What does he change in the second? He's going to give him back, it is written. He's going to give him back a quote, and he says this 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 is God will take care of you. If you come to harm, God will send his angels to protect you. So the second says cast thyself down, and God will protect. What does Ellen White call that? Ellen White calls that presumption. I want to refer to you what Elder Parminder taught about the nature of man. So what people are saying is essentially this: do you have to cast yourself down from temple? If I was to say, don't cast yourself down, I'm giving you law or good advice. I'm giving you a good advice. And I'm saying, I'm going to give you good advice, don't cast yourself down from the temple. And if you don't follow that good advice, what's going to happen? Satan says no consequences. You don't need to follow the good advice. So people are saying, Beyonce believes in equality. I can listen to her music. It passes the test. We know it's all about external events. We don't need the 1850 chart. Beyonce believes in equality. I can listen to her music and feel no consequence. I can wear earrings and no consequence. I can eat eggs if I choose to. It's only good advice, and there will be no consequence. Doing something that God has said don't do, it will hurt you, and thinking we're not to suffer consequences, that is the sin of presumption. There is a good advice that says don't cast yourself down, because if you do, you're placing yourself in a position where there will be consequences. And will God protect you from the consequences? No. And when we looked at the nature of man's study, what are the consequences? You go back to what Elder Parminder taught about the outer man and inner man. So this is the sin of presumption. It says, I can adorn, listen to music, watch worldly movies if they have some semblance of a message of equality. I can wear makeup. I can do all of these things with no consequences. They're only good advice. That's essentially what people are saying. And Jesus says, it is written, thou not tempt the Lord thy God. Because will God protect you? No, there are consequences. So the third temptation, again the devil takes him up into an exceedingly high mountain, and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and says unto him, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then says Jesus unto him, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. So in the third temptation, Satan offers him the kingdoms of the earth. What is Satan offering him? What is Satan offering us? A utopian society where there is no requirements or reforms. He is wrong geographically. Where does Jesus say his kingdom is? It's in heaven. Satan is saying, I'll give you a kingdom on earth. I'll give you a kingdom where you're going to be this political movement with secular power, where people have none of these troublesome requirements or reforms. The fact that they think it is this earthly secular society that's being raised up, that somehow we're going to join and become a force for good without bringing to them a spiritual message. All of the requirements, all of the increased light that we find in all of our vows. So it is a good idea that we can place ourselves in harm's way with no consequences, and God will protect us when we have clear. It is it is this idea that we can place ourselves in harm's way with no consequences, and God will protect us when we have clear stipulation that these external things, whether it's jewelry, earrings, makeup, what we eat, what we listen to, what we watch, and that somehow that doesn't affect us spiritually. That's what we're being tempted on. When we think of where we are in our reform line, and that's to tell us how to, it will tell us how to behave. We understand what we went through, that we went through a shaking, a difficult, painful history leading up to our close of probation, November 9. What I want to suggest is this: if you use the lines of Christ, the suffering he went through in Gethsemane, Ellen lines up with the suffering in the wilderness, and we have no time to be complacent and feel safe, feel that we're in a position of safety. As a movement, we know that it's a history of success, but God can do that with as few or as many people as choose to be part of that movement. So individually, we need to be aware of the danger that we're in. What I'm saying is that this misunderstanding about the line of the world, about the dangers of the test in their harvest period, not between conservatives and liberals, but between a true liberality and counterfeit liberality, is what will separate in that time period. The problem is we have been bringing into the movement, imbibing counterfeit liberality, counterfeit liberalism, and passing that as a true liberalism. We looked at where they are half wrong, the nature of kingdom they are trying to set up, what they expect of people, and then we went to the history of Christ. So this is she's summing it up, summarizing it, uh, concluding as a conclusion part. So we covered the history, looked at the issue of half wrong, the nature of the kingdom that the Netanims are trying to set up, not Netanims, the world is trying to set up, and what they expect of people. And then we went to the history of Christ in the wilderness, and those are the three temptations. And okay, if those are the three temptations he faced in his history, you know that they are the three temptations that every one of us in this movement faces. Are we taking a message that comes from the Gentiles, their error from the stone, and trying to make it food for us because we're hungry? Some are. We're thinking that we can do all of these things which God advises us not to do, and somehow there are no consequences, and we will be protected. That's the second temptation. The third temptation is about the nature of their kingdom. Do we want the kingdom that they're wanting to set up in their half-wrong idea of the first angel, or do we understand that God raised up the priests to set up a different type of kingdom, and that in this history we're not half-wrong in our understanding of that? We're 100% correct, and the world has nothing to teach us. I want us to consider that some of the risks that we're in, and here she's going to show. So this is the Jeff in our history. When we come down to reform line in 2012, reform line. So to 2012 is the formalization of the message on time. Does Elder Jeff accept time in 2012? No. In 2018, does he accept time? Yes. So he doesn't accept it here, he accepts it here. Yeah, so he did. So did it do him any good? No. Why? Was it too late? It was too late by the time it came into this history, and the door had already shut. So that sounds doom and gloom, and it is. I don't think it has to be that hopeless. Was he part of the movement that entire history? So it took him 7 years to live, but in 2012 it's already a done deal. So we live with two warnings. Just because people seem to accept the message of equality, many of us haven't. We claim to accept it, we don't practice it, we don't live it. When it's pointed out to us, we don't like it. And is that actual acceptance? So does being part of the movement for 7 years give you any comfort? No. I don't enjoy arranging people's lives or interfering, but think for yourself whether or not you understand the message of equality and whether or not you're practicing it, because it hasn't stopped being life and death. You may think that you passed it if you're not practicing it, if you're not properly understanding it, if you're not liking when it's pointed out to you and being reminded of it. If you think it's fine to excuse sexism, you can give 7 years, but you're a dead man walking. Elder Jeff was. That dynamic has not changed. I want us to leave us with that thought, not to depress us, but to warn us, because it's a life and death issue. At the same time, people are battling with that subject of equality. We have these three temptations to face, and we're in much danger with this, as we are in the last months of 2019. We have to be careful that we understand the world and our relationship to it correctly. Only by doing that we can be safe to understand who we are. While we see Christ, the movement smitten and torn, both before and after November 9, we know that it's a history of success. What I want is that all of us to be part of that history. Okay, so do you guys have any questions? Yeah, this part was very solemn, where she says about 2012. So he rejected it at the time of the formalization, and then here's Tess, yeah, and he accepts it. I mean, he accepted it by 2018, but it was too late.
It can be really scary and fearful for all of us to know that we know what we know, and literally be pleading for truth and get our lives so in order that we are in perfect tune with the message.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, what would cause him to reject it? Because
I think it's family ties. You mean Jeff?
Yeah.
I think it is strong family ties, because that's all he has. I mean, you know, it's the strong family ties, and in a certain way, maybe misinformation, like maybe he's not, his disciples maybe have their own, they're not as honest in the with themselves, with why they are rejecting this message. And that's how he would, because he would not listen. He would just only want to take it secondhand. So they are passing on to him corrupted information that is, I don't know how, I don't think they understood it.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, I didn't really get to know Jeff, but I'm just speculating that maybe he really didn't fully understand the message. And that's where it started to fracture in his mind, because he didn't fully understand. And like Elaine is saying, we have to truly follow and have our minds be aligned with all, the message.
Mhm.
And that's the only thing that I can think of. He didn't truly fully understand.
Because it is something within us that causes us. It's something, our desires, our pride, or what have you. It's something within us still walking in areas that we know we ought not to. There are things that we can do that cause us to that block us from being able to see what is right before us. And it's a scary thing to think that it
I thought they were alluding to the test part, the racism and sexism, because
yeah.
in 2012, the message that it came from outside of the U.S. and it came from a brown person.
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody. Oh, did he say that?
No, I'm just saying. But he was saying when he was talking about the recent ones with sexism and
Yeah.
whatever they are, he said that Jeff may have been nice to them, but he liked. You know what I'm saying? The hierarchy position.
Oh yeah.
And one of these ones, one of these most recent ones, it might have been the very last one. I don't remember of Tess. Where those last ones that got posted, she's talking about how, and maybe you guys heard this already, but she's talking about 3 different people, and I'm pretty sure she's talking about Theodore being one of them, and maybe she was talking about Jeff as being one, I don't remember, but one other person, I don't know who the other person was, but she's talking about this person that when it came to the midnight cry given in Arkansas, or I think she said it was something that was presented sooner to some of these people, I don't know, and he told her that, I don't remember if anybody watched it to remember how she said it, but he literally mocked her and called her a little girl and go back and study more or something like that.
Theodore?
Terribly paraphrasing that, but he wasn't going to accept it from a little girl.
Wow.
And that's like really sad, because you know what, we should be thinking, I mean, all my years of reading, there were a lot of things, we've all had it, that impress our minds along the way. And it's like, how old was Ellen White?
Yeah, she was very young.
And does God choose? How many times do we have to see that he does not choose the wisest
or the strongest or anything? He always chooses the weakest, smallest.
Yes.
So who was it that was saying called her a little girl, Theodore or Elder Jeff?
No, it was whoever this other person is that she's talking about that came up with some of this theology, but I don't think she was talking about Theodore. It might have been Theodore, but I don't think so. That she's talking about somebody else, and I don't know who it is. But she's talking about different people that were parts of the message that's all put together, and stuff that Jeff had been following along with. And I don't think it was Theodore. She didn't say it was Theodore, and she was kind of talking somewhat of naming him at times, but she's just going down through their how they come about, and going through all the various different calendars that they use, and how God wouldn't do that. And I remember Tony was here too that night when they had that camp meeting where Theodore, I think it was right after Arkansas, what had happened, and then they had a camp meeting. It was after the initial Midnight Cry message in October when it was first presented, and Theodore was doing these things with the calendar and going backwards on the calendar, taking the line and going backwards, and then also taking the 2/12/60s with the 7 years, those last 7 weeks, and taking those 7 years, and instead of being 2/12/60s, he had them different numbers for different dates because of different calendars. And I was like, who's supposed to even follow that? You know what I mean? It was like, made no sense whatsoever.
It reminds me back of what was his name? The guy who came into the tape room.
Into the tape room.
With his calendars, remember before all of this?
Oh yeah, Larry.
Yeah, Larry, this the same thing, and that's the same thing we thought then. God wouldn't make it so convoluted.
Yeah. Yeah. I thank God that for his mercy that I'm even still here, because I know I'm not smart enough to figure any of this out. But I'm thankful that I still understand it and still keep going forward. What message didn't he understand? He didn't understand the message of time. I think that's what we were talking about. He didn't accept the message of time. And he just, I think it was Sister Donna saying that he just doesn't understand. I came to think that too, that he just doesn't understand. But it goes beyond that. Not understanding isn't the effect. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at.
He doesn't try to understand. He didn't try to understand.
Yeah, because there's got to be a cause.
Yeah.
And if
Yes,
we don't
you're
understand,
right. There's an underlying cause why he did refuse to listen in.
yeah,
Racism.
yeah,
That's what they were talking about. Her and Parminder calling out people from the United States refuse to accept a message that comes not from them.
yeah.
Sexism.
And sexism, yeah.
Yeah, so he didn't accept Parminder's 2012, and then when Tess came around, he wouldn't even talk to her or watch her videos or have any correspondence with her. So he felt racism and sexism.
Maybe it's, maybe it's this, I wouldn't say even just Adventist, but American Christian kind of pride, of national pride, like, who are these people? Not to say who, he knows them. He knew Parminder a long time ago, but he's just more like, it's us supposed to be coming with something like that, and instead it's, these people are,
That too.
that, pride, national pride, like, why the outsiders.
Well, I do remember him saying before the whole Germany thing, he made a statement, Jeff did, about how, okay, I get it. I can understand. I don't know if I'm saying this wrong. I can understand that God had to use somebody outside the country to bring this message in. I remember him saying that once.
Same.
But it seems like ever since then it's been more so along the lines of a lot of criticism to you can't expect somebody that doesn't live here to understand U.S. politics and the Constitution and all of that. And it's like, you know what? It took somebody not being here purposely, because we're blinded to what we live in every day where we shouldn't have been. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, well, I have to say I've been listening to his previously when I just started joining the movement. I didn't know that there is a two different camps, and all I heard was Elder Jeff talking about all these other movements that were part of the movement that left, and always and I wasn't sure why there's so much. It felt like there's an internal struggle, and I was wondering, is it the internal fight between the leaders? What's going on? and I have to say, I was a not this I wasn't really listening to any of the Elder Parminder's in the very beginning I was listening to Jeff Pippinger's recordings, the old recordings, and they were there's this series where somebody I think shared, actually, where he presents to the Adventist, I think it's Andrews University, to the Adventist Biblical Research, this institute or something like that. So basically, it's the body of in Adventism that is responsible for the theological standing of the Adventism, and he's presenting it to them. And I just remember that it is so impressive. It is so, even his, the way, the manner in which he speaks, his especially in the old tapes, in the old recordings, is so, it's like falls right into your heart. I don't know how to describe it, but I was so so fascinated by his presentation to that group, because they were trying to they were showing, they were arguing about his positions, because he was presenting, he was talking about what is 1989 to this group of people, to the scholars. He's trying to explain that this is the fall of the great empire. That's where we are. And the way he describes, and the way his voice of tone, it is really, to me, it sounded like, wow, this is so profound. It sounds like William Miller speaking. So yeah. So I did not know that there's two different camps at all until I started hearing, from Elder Jeff himself, and then I was, started, and then I discovered Elder Permitter. I was like, wow, this guy is so good. Oh, this
Yeah.
is, yeah, amazing.
So Lana, you came in after the split?
No, I came in before split. I guess there is already two camps have been developed by the time I came. I think I started joining in April. So April 2019.
Wow. Seems like you've been with us forever.
I know. But it's really amazing, how profound this is, the voice of, comes from ancient times. It's I've
Yeah.
been listening to this study of Elder Parminder about well, there's just so many I've been listening to this lately, but this Daniel, in Daniel 8, and it is so profound. It is so, exactly what I think Adventism really needs. I mean, not that I think I know, but yeah. I guess I'm rambling.
Just praise the Lord that He brought you through. It's just amazing.
Oh, I don't know where would I've been if it wasn't for the group, for this group, really, because I don't think there's anybody, I think there's the one in Canada, but somehow only this group is just, very stable, very, very responsible in keeping the line open, the studies and the way we approach to this to the services. Yeah, that's what held me in this movement.
It's interesting because when I first started reading the Bible and then came into the Seventh-day Adventist Church, just seemed like the right thing to do to start having some Bible studies. I hardly knew anything about what I was doing, but we had Bible studies at home, and the kids were, younger when they were still around, and then we have some, the groups would vary at times. Adriana and I were talking, she was there for a while, and the group would vary. Victoria had come there a couple times, and but one thing that I don't know where I learned it, and it wasn't necessarily just pertaining to Bible study, but the need to be consistent. You have to be consistent. And if the person holding the Bible study is not going to be consistent, then the people are going to be inconsistent as well. So I've always been that way with work and anything else. It's that you have to be there no matter what. So every Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday nights, every Wednesday, no matter what, without fail, we did Bible study. And I tried to keep it going when, it would shift and people couldn't make it. And then it came down to just these two kids that I don't remember how they found us. It was their parents knew somebody at the church that connected them with us, and they'd drop them off for Bible study. And it came down to just being me and the kids. And then, why am I drawing a blank at a name that I wanted to say? There's a couple other gentlemen from the church that came a few times, but then it just finally ended. So when we started studying this message, it was like just perfectly natural to pick up and start doing Bible study again, but do it every week without fail. I think I missed one Bible study, and that was when it was the only reason I couldn't prevent it in the transition between selling the house in Elk Grove and moving here, was the pressure that I was under to want to close so that I could get out here and move in sooner than what they did. It wound up happening on a Wednesday. So it was like, I think our Bible study was still Thursday. It wound up happening that I had to move on Thursday. Had to. So I was like, there was no way I could pull off moving, and plus the house didn't have the carpet in yet, and it was just being painted. So I literally lived in the kitchen. So it was the only time I've ever missed a Bible study that I can remember. And but it really is important to be consistent for people, and that's what we need to be thinking about for all of us going forward, because that consistency, meaning that no matter what comes up, we always make sure that that's what this time is for, because we're going to be out there helping others. You know what I'm saying? We're all going to go our ways, however that works out, in helping others. And it's important that people see consistency.
Yeah. Amen. I think that's also true for like every other part of
Yes,
life,
yes,
studying or eating at the same time.
yeah, consistency. Very important. It's orderly, you know what I mean? Because God's a God of order.
Yeah.
So it was a good study, and it's been a really blessed week with those presentations that have been on. Jacob's Time of Trouble, I think you guys all watched, most of us all watched that. We talked about it some on Wednesday night. Yeah. Really good studies.
Those were amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was an intense message. And then the harvest time. Have you guys seen that one?
That was the first one, I think.
I have. It was, it's amazing. Each one of them is like.
I'm wondering, what is it that we didn't learn that they were supposed to teach us, the priest that came before 2014?
What is it that what priest before 2014? That you mean like FFA and that?
No, Parminder in that video, that's why I'm asking if you guys saw it, the harvest time. He said that there's two groups of priests. There were the ones who came in prior to 2014, which is the Sunday law. And then there's all these priests that came in between 2014 and 2019. And the priests from the prior time period didn't teach the priests in this time period certain things from back then. And now we have these 2 years to get everyone caught up on that information. What is that information?
How I understood is that it's this to train this last people that joined, because they don't know anything.
No. He said the people that joined from 2014 to 2019, that's all of us here in this Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
That's who need to get trained by the people who were here before. That's what I'm asking. What is that information that we didn't get?
Well, like always, I'll have to go back and change that, because I was kind of on the same place as Sister Lana, because I remember him saying that the new ones that come in, we have to get them up to speed.
No, he said he had the lines up. He had 1989 to 2014 and all the priests that came in during that time period into this movement. Those were the first set. Then he split the line up into 2014 to 2019, which is where all of us came in. And those priests didn't get taught everything from the whole other how many years prior that they should have learned. And that's what this 2 years is for us to learn from those older priests.
Well, I'm gonna have to go back and watch that, because the only older priests you would really have
it's only
Parminder and a few people, because
like from what he said that, but that's what I'm asking. What is it that we didn't learn?
I think he really meant that it's that they are in less advantage than this group that is.
That was a different point. That was a separate point that he was making.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch it, because and plus I miss things doing other stuff while I'm watching it, and I know I listened to that when I was out on my walk. And I
was focused on it because that was a question we've had for a long time. What are these 2 years for? And he didn't just say that. He said the people who came in between 2014 and 2019 brought along a lot of crazy, wacky ideas with them.
Well, yeah, but when like I said, I'm gonna have to go back and watch it again, because if you think about the priests that were before, those are the people, a lot of those people aren't even here. So we learn.
Yeah, no, he said that. He
Those-
said there's a small number left, but those small number didn't do the job of teaching the priests what they're supposed to know.
And so we come in and we've been mistaught. And that you did make that point, I think.
That's what I've been saying.
Yeah, we have been mistaught, but it wasn't because if they didn't teach us something, it was something that they didn't know or they didn't accept or they didn't reject. So
That's not what he was saying. He said that there was things that they have to unlearn, but there's things that we were supposed to get taught by them that didn't happen. I'm pretty sure he said
that's the first one.
Yeah, I kind of was making notes and I don't recall that. I mean, he was very clearly drawing a line that he was making, a point about advantage, disadvantage, and he was saying about the cultural difference and, problems with the first priest, first group of priests. And then he was focusing on why this gap, and that it's not trained enough, aren't ready, and
yeah, he said the gap is to teach us.
Well, did you see?
Yeah, he did say that, and he said that the ones that came before those, within the 2014 and 2019, they actually are at a bigger disadvantage because they have to unlearn things. But those who've come after, which was us, after 2014 to 2019, we are at a disadvantage too, because even though we don't have to unlearn all the things that, the people that came before us, there's so much that we don't know that we have to now get caught up to speed, and we don't have a lot of time, because he said this next 2 years, it's going to fly by really fast.
Yeah, he was initially making the point that there's a lot of people that joined right towards the end of 2019, but he went past that afterwards, and he was stating it was the whole time period between 2014 and 2019, I thought.
Well, the Flukas family put a quote in here too, or put a statement in here that he was saying that the priests that came right before 2019 don't know everything that happened between 1989 and 2014. And so there's some stuff in history. And I'm going to, in that history,
I have to watch it again then, because I must be.
Yeah, he did say that, and because I realized that was me too, that I was part of that group.
Because us coming in earlier on than you, Sister Donna, we were under that training that was wrong and missing things.
Yeah,
along the way.
And and me and Renee are in that group there. We just got in just in 2019.
Right.
So we're at that place where we just don't know a lot of the stuff that, like the history stuff. We have a lot to learn.
You know what really amazed me, really amazed me in this presentation is that the way he talks about it is that he says that all priests are equal, meaning that, so this gap, he stresses that, it's because the last priests aren't ready and they aren't trained enough. So
the 11th hour workers were all equal.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's like
hopeful.
It is how would I put it? I had this idea that there's some of us that are better priests, that are really priests, and some of us are probably gonna die, and and he just really dispels it. Just basically everybody has to come up to the same level as him.
Yeah.
Which is wow. Because I've been listening to this flood series from somebody shared on Facebook. It is so deep. It is so amazing. He talks about the flood, and there's such such depth to it. And I just thought like, oh man, there's so much to learn. But it's everything is so deep, but just not enough time. I mean, I guess that's why there's this gap, to allow for us to learn the things that are there that we didn't know, like I didn't know. So yeah.
We need to do whatever we need to do in our lives that clears and frees our minds to have a greater relationship with the Lord and a closer, connection to be understanding, to work out parables, because that's how he, understands the things that he does, is all these years in studying, and that, and parables opened up later, but he was already seeing them. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking to one of my girlfriends. She's not following this group, but I told her that the treasure in scripture are the parables. And she was like, well, she's a Christian. She's really the parables? And she said, like the little stories. And I said, yep. I said, that is where God's hidden treasure is, because that's where prophecy is for our time. It's just, and she couldn't believe it. She was like, wow, I didn't know. Because, we're taught as Christians that the parables are more like, the little stories are just moral stories,
Yeah.
nice little stories, but there's so much more.
But then it becomes even more complicated, because then you study more, and then you find out that every story in the Bible is a parable.
Yeah.
And then even in the history is also a parable.
Because that's how God communicates with us.
Yeah.
Through parables.
And being able to look at all these histories, I think that's what Sister Lana just mentioned too, being able to look at all these histories and see them as a parable.
As a parable. Yeah. It's amazing.
So, well, does somebody want to close off in prayer?
Okay, I guess I can do that. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful to you that we have this opportunity to get together like this, that each one of us in a different part of the world, in the different part of the country, that we have this opportunity, this technology, that we have this, everything has been set up for us to be ready to learn and to get ready for your to collaborate with you and to do work for you. Dear Heavenly Father, please be with each one of us. Send us your Holy Spirit that we may continue, that we may remember and recall all the things that we have learned just now, all the things that we have heard just now, or this ideas that you wanted to communicate to us, that we would internalize it and make it our own, that we would become responsible and diligent and faithful servants of yours. Dear Heavenly Father, please be with each one of us and be with our elders. We pray and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Good night, everyone.
We'll be back. Good night. We'll be back at